If meaning is real and discoverable, why does understanding never seem complete? This question touches a quiet frustration many people experience, but rarely articulate. Meaning is often treated as something that can be fully grasped, learned, or concluded. Once an idea, experience, or lesson is understood, it is expected to remain stable, available for repeated use whenever needed. Yet experience, consistently, contradicts this assumption. Interpretations that once felt sufficient later feel inadequate. Insights that once explained life lose their explanatory power. The same events, texts, or relationships no longer produce the same clarity they once did. This creates a sense of instability, as if understanding itself were unreliable. To address this, a distinction must be made between meaning as a fixed conclusion and meaning as an unfolding process. According to Ibn Arabi, meaning cannot be finished because reality itself is never static. Meaning ends only when reality is assumed to be complete, and that assumption, he argues, is structurally false. Modern psychological life intensifies this tension. People are encouraged to figure life out, to arrive at definitive answers about identity, purpose, relationships, and values. There is strong pressure toward closure, certainty, and final explanations. Ambiguity is treated as a problem rather than a condition of understanding. In psychological terms, this reflects a need for cognitive closure, a preference for definitive answers over open-ended inquiry. Closely related is intolerance of uncertainty, which has been linked to anxiety and rigid thinking patterns. The brain, from a neuroscientific perspective, prefers stable narratives because they reduce prediction, error, and threat response. When predictive models fail, when life does not conform to expected meanings, anxiety increases. As a result, people often respond by over-intellectualizing experience, attempting to force explanation where none is available. The consequences are familiar: frustration when old meanings stop working, existential stress when life resists explanation, and mental fatigue from constant interpretation. The core problem is structural. Meaning is treated as a product to be completed rather than a process to be engaged. Ibn Arabi explains why this expectation is fundamentally mistaken. Ibn Arabi is sometimes misunderstood as promoting obscurity or endless ambiguity. In fact, he offers a precise philosophy of meaning grounded in how reality discloses itself to perception. His work centers on a clear metaphysical principle. Reality reveals itself continuously. Meaning, in this framework, does not exist independently as a finished object. It emerges from ongoing disclosure. Ibn Arabi distinguishes between meaning as interpretation, the conceptual frameworks humans construct, and meaning as manifestation, which arises directly from reality's self-presentation. From a rational standpoint, meaning is not imposed on reality by the mind. It arises through interaction between reality and perception. This anticipates modern hermeneutics and process-based theories of understanding, which treat meaning as dynamic rather than static. In this view, the instability of meaning is not a flaw. It is evidence that reality itself is active, not exhausted by previous interpretations. Ibn Arabi's central claim is that reality never discloses itself in a final form. Each moment presents a new configuration of meaning. What was understood previously does not become false. It becomes incomplete. This aligns closely with contemporary cognitive science. Predictive processing models describe the brain as constantly updating its interpretations in response to new information. Understanding is provisional by design. Models are revised, not finalized. A simple, real-world example illustrates this clearly. When you reread the same book at different stages of life, the text has not changed, but its meaning has. New layers become visible because the perceiver has changed. The earlier interpretation was not wrong, it was appropriate to its context. The key insight is that meaning deepens through recurrence, not completion. Repeated engagement reveals new aspects because reality and perception are never static. Expecting final insight contradicts how perception actually functions. Ibn Arabi identifies the desire to finalize meaning as a psychological impulse toward control. Fixed meaning provides a sense of security. It reduces uncertainty and stabilizes identity. However, this stability comes at a cost. From a psychological perspective, meaning is often used to manage anxiety. Stable narratives reduce cognitive load and dampen threat responses. Neuroscientifically, coherent stories lower amygdala activation by restoring predictability. Yet when meaning is fixed, perception narrows. New information is filtered out or resisted. Rigid interpretations form, and learning slows. This occurs not because reality has stopped revealing itself, but because perception has closed. Ibn Arabi's corrective is precise. Meaning exists to serve awareness, not security. When meaning is used primarily to reduce uncertainty, it ceases to function accurately. Openness, rather than closure, preserves perceptual fidelity, one of Ibn Arabi's most counterintuitive insights is that reality does not repeat its self-disclosure. Events may appear similar, but their meaning is never identical. The difference lies not in the external form alone, but in the internal state of the perceptor. Modern psychology supports this through context-dependent perception. Meaning is shaped by situational factors, emotional state, and prior experience. Memory itself is reconstructive, not archival. Each recall subtly alters interpretation. Consider a common example. A life lesson understood intellectually during youth carries a different meaning when encountered through lived experience later in life. The content may be the same, but the significance is transformed. The implication is clear. Meaning evolves because the knower evolves. Completion would require a static subject, one whose consciousness no longer changes. Such a condition does not exist in living experience. Ibn Arabi extends this logic further by examining the nature of the knower. Meaning depends on the state of the perceiver. Consciousness itself is dynamic, shaped by development, attention, and circumstance. Psychology increasingly understands the self as a process rather than a fixed entity. Identity, emotion, and cognition shift over time. A changing subject necessarily encounters changing meaning. From this perspective, the openness of meaning is not a failure of understanding. It is a reflection of human development. Meaning cannot end because the knower is never complete. Final meaning would require final consciousness, a state in which perception no longer changes. Life does not provide such a condition. Meaning remains open because awareness remains alive. A paradox now becomes evident. The stronger the desire for closure, the greater the dissatisfaction when closure fails to arrive. Cognitive science shows that over-reliance on explanation can reduce direct engagement with experience. Life becomes something to interpret rather than something to encounter. Ibn Arabi's position is not nihilistic and not skeptical. He does not deny meaning. He denies finality. Meaning is meant to guide awareness, not terminate inquiry. Suffering arises when expectation contradicts structure. When meaning is expected to end, reality appears frustrating. When meaning is allowed to remain open, experience regains coherence without rigidity. Practically, this framework suggests several cognitive shifts. One is treating meaning as provisional rather than definitive. Another is allowing interpretations to evolve without interpreting change as failure. Psychologically, this reduces existential anxiety and improves emotional regulation. It allows ambiguity without threat. In relationships, it supports growth rather than stagnation. In learning and creativity, it encourages exploration rather than premature conclusion. Professionally, this approach benefits education, research, and therapy fields where understanding must remain responsive. The key distinction is orientation toward understanding rather than closure. Meaning guides engagement. It does not end it. Meaning cannot be finished because reality does not stop revealing itself. Ibn Arabi reframes meaning not as a conclusion, but as a living process shaped by disclosure and perception. Incompleteness, in this framework, is not a flaw. It is accuracy. When meaning is no longer forced to end, understanding becomes continuous rather than fragile. What changes is not reality, but the way understanding is held. Meaning remains alive because awareness remains in motion.